this labeling stuff, what we're going to do about labels, and how we're going to, within that, we're going to, like, how we're going to engage with the suppliers or the vendors or the providers or whatever we want to call it, and how we're going to test those things, and whether that's just reuse of somebody else's certification mechanism, such as the CSA one that's being developed, or whether there's something specific that we want to achieve out of that. So that's one working group. Then we've got a second one which has to do with this, this education and awareness component. And then we've got a third one, and that one has something to do with network resiliency, how the network is resilient in response to this environment of all of these things that are on it, and also how the things are resilient in the face of network attacks and providing the things and so on. Notice that those are actually completely different problems, right? The one is you've got all these devices and maybe the zombie apocalypse comes. So we geeks, we call it the zombie apocalypse because these things go zombie, right? They die and they just kind of float around on the network, and that can attack the rest of the network. But you've got the problem in the other direction too. So there's a problem about, for instance, you know, do your light bulbs still work after a certain amount of time? Because one of the things a certain number of geeks have proposed is that they have a death built into them, so that the device just dies after, say, 5 years because it's too dangerous and we don't believe that the support's going to be there. So it's a mandatory requirement that if you're going to plug this into the electrical system, just for instance, then the thing after 5 years, it will simply stop working. And you know, you think about some scenarios there, it's kind of amusing, for instance, to imagine that, you know, you've got the front porch light on in order to identify to the coming ambulance that this is where the heart attack is happening, and the 5 minutes stops in the middle, or the 5 years stops in the middle of that, and the light turns off. That would be a bad thing. So that's an example of the sort of issues that could be there. That's a different kind of resilience than the problem you know, on the network and so on. So those, I think, are the three big ones. Does anybody disagree with those at the topmost level? Okay, so what we're going to do, I've got, I didn't really have a place to put it, so it's up here to the right, and I'm going to peel these things off as we go. What I want to do is try to nail down some topics, and the reason we're going to do this in plenary is because we've got about 20 remote participants, and so I can't just divide you up because we don't have that many microphones and we don't have a way to communicate with everybody and so on, and it is the internet after all. And the idea is that this is the sort of limitation, the boundary conditions for these for three working groups that we're going to try to set up today, and we're going to try to find people who are interested in them. So what I propose to do is to try to slice up the topics that we want to put into these things, and then people are going to express their interest, and I'm going to take your names. We got a chart. I don't know where it went. It's on a clipboard, and people are going to be able to sign up for it, and we're going to pass that around. So I'm just warning you, this is coming, and you know you can't slip out before because we're going to lock the doors. You think I'm kidding? Okay, so the first thing is this labeling thing, and so I propose that one topic for it is deciding whether there is a label to be developed, or if this is just a label to be identified and used. Is that a fair thing? Does anybody want to? Yes.
And the other, there might be another option in there, which is to find a way to strategically. Sorry. Another option there might be to strategically feed into a label or creation process, assuming that there's one out there, but not solve it for them, but say identify a specific thing that we can feed into a process that's being developed.
Okay, so you're saying there are really three options here: build one ourselves, find somebody else's, or align with somebody else to develop something collaboratively with a bunch of other people. Okay, so the first thing I see here what I put here is develop, use, or collaborate. Okay, is that a fair thing? All right, so that's one thing that it has to do. A second thing maybe that this thing has to do is figure out how to engage with the providers of these things. So that includes manufacturers, vendors of devices, resellers of devices, online people who do things, weird open source people who get together on the internet and make stuff and put it on GitHub and never release another update for it after 10 years. I've never done that. So is that another thing, like how to engage with the people? Is that these people have this topic? Because remember, we're dividing up the universe here, so nobody else gets to, I mean, among our working groups, we're gonna say that's where that thing is gonna be worked on. Nobody's objecting. This is the most compliant multi-stakeholder group like there's no way I've got two things and like nobody's objected to anything yet. Fair point.
It would be impolite to.
Okay, so I've got this interact with providers. Now, another thing we talked about before was this testing question. Do we want the testing, the identification of the testing to live here? Do we think that the testing itself is just none of their business because other people are developing the testing and they should just identify the tests? Is this the place that lives? Are you here because you need to, somebody's got something online? Oh. No. Oh. Okay. You won't be able to read it anyway. I'm writing it down. I haven't been able to write for more than 10 years now. I type everything, right? If there were a giant typewriter up here, I'd be okay. So I put here, identify tests and develop if needed. Or develop the tests if we need them.
And testers.
And testers too, okay? Good, this is excellent.
Comma, or mechanisms for.
Okay.
Or mechanisms for to make it a potential ongoing process, recognizing that it's going to be an iterative. There might be a need for a mechanism to iteratively identify what tests are needed, and et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
Now, the last topic that seemed to fit into this thing was this issue of scale. We had the emphasis on the scale rather than the testing as such. And originally in our list, those were sort of bound together. So I'm wondering if the scale issue belongs here or if it belongs somewhere else.
So I guess I would say, as far as like the fourth or last, if there is a last component, it is something in the realm of adoption, scale, and like the public or the outward-facing element of this, which is why I actually think we could roll up number 9 as far as showcasing IoT stars, right? That there would be some element of this where you would be able to, on a, like, considering we're on like the full industry-wide scale here, be able to see who is doing what, again, assuming that people are adopting.
So this is interesting. You go ahead first.
In case this is going to be the last point there, but in furthering up in
We have more paper.
Okay, good. Because in this process of doing the outward component, is there an awareness and education component here in how to read the labels that this group also develops to feed into other parts?
So these are 2 points that I think are both interesting, and they strike me actually as from my point of view, the same question. My natural response to that is that both of those things have to do more with awareness and education than they have to do with this sort of testing and labeling as such. That is, to me, this working group, whatever we're going to call it, I was joking during the break that we'll use the traditional geek approach of naming them Alice, Bob, Charlie, but maybe that would be confusing to everybody else. In any case, I'm thinking that this has to do with like what you put on the box or how you identify these things. And the stars, the communication about who's doing things, that sort of showcasing thing has more to do with the outward-facing thing of how do you, raise awareness, how do you make people able to make these decisions and so on. So this is the sort of information content, as it were, and the other one has more to do with the process by which you put the thing across. That was what I was thinking, but I don't know what your reaction is to that.
I believe that in the new way of doing these things, the people that are developing that have to know that it's going to be communicated outward. So they're going to have to provide the content for the awareness and education group to perhaps provide the how and the when. But when the technical people are designing and implementing, they have to be preparing the communication, or at least the content. So what I'm trying to say is that if you're going to be designing a label that's going to be impossible to educate people upon, so in the design you have to have the user in mind. Because the testing, no, but we're talking about labels here, right?
Yes.
Labels for devices. So there's a component that it doesn't apply, right? So the testing would not apply to what I'm trying to say. But if we're talking about labels for devices, in that part, it has to be designed with the user in mind.
Yes.
So
let me just pause for a moment and point out, there's no requirement that people pick one of these things to participate in, right? You could participate in all of them, and that would be great. So there does need to be some cross-pollination. I completely agree with that. And you're quite correct that there is a usability component here that has to apply. I don't think anybody was disagreeing with that.
In some instances, if these groups provide the content that then another group will use to provide all the programs, that's fine. But you have to be aware that there has to be a communication of how people are supposed to read the label, right?
Yep.
Jacques Lato. So in my little magic crystal ball, the future, I think the internet, the IETF is working on a new protocol which is called MUD, which is Manufacturer Usage Description. And that specification is meant to define what the IoT device is, how it's supposed to behave inside your home network or the enterprise. But for a water sensor, the way you implement MUD is with a sticker on an IoT device with a QR code. And when you scan that QR code, it brings you to a website to say, this is a profile of the IoT device. So in the future, we plan on putting stickers on every device because we like putting stickers everywhere. But we're going to put stickers on every IoT device, and maybe at the same time we do MUD, we should have a way to educate the user to say if it's a purple sticker, it means this, or a blue sticker. But in the end, every device should have stickers to identify what they are.
And do you think that belongs in this?
Well, if MUD, no, but the stickers that people will see, yes.
Okay.
The label needs to mean something to. When you look at the sticker and you look at it should be holographic and it should be whatever.
So I see Alan also, so I'm going to give Alan a chance first.
Well, having heard from FOD online about what the work the CSA is doing, and now Jacques' example, I wonder if we should just limit ourselves by saying we will not have made in Canada standards, okay, and accept the reality that there'll have to be some process to accept them, if you know what I mean, but the actual standards development work would not occur here, because that would shrink the amount of work that we would be doing, And just, I mean, there might be a process of examining those for their, I guess, their applicability in Canada, but then that would leave us more focused dealing with consumer education, how to ensure, what's the mechanism for ensuring compliance, is that the right word, with standards, adherence to standards. So just a suggestion, thank you.
So you're suggesting that this needs to be only about conformance or adherence and not about the development of the standards as such?
Yes, that's the, well, there might be a process which examines the international standards for the validity, is there, but actually reverse the onus. Is there anything in this standard being developed that would be inappropriate or in the Canadian context?
Okay.
Or something like that, so shrink the work to be done, maybe reverse the onus? Yeah.
Okay. Kim?
Oh, there's Spot. Oh, Spot's here.
Oh, okay. So we had, but I think Kim was first.
I was just going to briefly say that in this concept of having different labels or different colors to mean different things, it's obviously a technical group that is going to be defining what each label means. So, I mean, it can't be the awareness group that knows what to put in each label, right? So if it has a category, if it does expire, or the technical aspects is what the label will reflect. So it's, for me, it's in that group,
Okay.
you know what I mean?
Todd?
I just wanted to, it's a FoudCon, by the way. I was online, I'm now in the room. So to Alan's point, I think when you look at just what the whole, and I agree with you, we shouldn't create any standards, because I think lots of groups are taking that on, and we don't want to do that because we'll boil the ocean and just waste a lot of time on that. But I think what we need to do is come up with our requirements for what that is, right? And I think from that, then you say, okay, what are the things important to the Canadian consumer? What is important to Canadian business? And then what's important to Canadian government? And then those requirements then determine which standards groups, and even specific requirements who might not necessarily be a standard are then considered, I think, for the program as we look at it. And that's how we require it, whether it's the labeling, whether it's the awareness, all those kind of things. And I think that's the easier way to look at this problem from that perspective. If you look at just the work that's being done, I know like IEEE is doing this, ISO's doing this, IEC is doing this, and there's things from interoperability to security to privacy to user interfaces to specific things, deployment scenarios. I don't think we get into that. I think that is really going to waste a lot of our time. So focus on the awareness piece. How do we strategically reach those markets? And so if it's a consumer, how do we get to the consumers in the areas that we think we should get there? And then there's also the businesses, right? I think businesses are who are looking to buy IoT want to get into it, but it's security and privacy is one of those key elements. So what can we educate them on how to evaluate a provider, for example, solutions, those kind of things. I think those are the key aspects that we should be looking for. And there is information out there that we can use to build on.
So I understand this, but it sounds to me like you're suggesting, well, maybe I don't understand you. It sounds to me like you're suggesting that actually the top three that we'd come up with before, this sort of the content of the labels sort of thing, the awareness piece, and the network resiliency, that you actually want to throw away number one and just work on the awareness and the network resiliency. Is that correct?
No, it's not correct.
Okay.
What I'm saying is focus on those areas, but do it from a requirements perspective, right? So what are the requirements for label? What are the requirements for awareness? So we understand that. So if, for example, if you're going to say use this specific standard, I don't necessarily know that we're at the stage where we say use a specific standard. What we should say is, if you have this classification of product, here's the standards you should consider. Here's the certifications you should consider. And then that determines the label that you use.
So you're,
Right.
you're saying that you don't want this group to develop, I think this is similar to what Alan was saying, that you don't want this group to develop standards as such.
That's right.
Yeah,
100%. Yeah.
my impression is that that's a complete consensus in this room.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay.
But what I'm saying is, even if we're going, I think we still need to evaluate what the current standards are.
Okay.
And from that, though, but prior to doing that, you need to create your requirements to say, okay, what is the consideration for those standards? Because that will then drive, the labels that you look at, the awareness that you need to create, all those things. So it's almost like stepping back to just say, what are the requirements for label? What are the requirements for awareness? And then that should drive then the outputs from those. That's what I'm saying. So it's almost just stepping back just a little bit to understand what those things are. Look at there's volumes of this work that's been done for years. So I'm also saying, don't go boil the ocean again, trying to rediscover all this stuff. Let's look at all the papers that have been done in IEEE, in ISO, and IEC, in the EU. Use those as our inputs, and then create our small list of requirements. From that, that'll drive our requirements for labeling, for awareness, everything else.
So what I think I'm hearing, because remember, what I'm trying to do here is distill these points down so that when we leave the room later, we can write these things down as charters for working groups that then we can have people who have already signed up. Remember, I'm going to hand those things around. Have I mentioned that already? That we're going to have these charters so that people have a crisp idea of what each working group is working on, so that if they come later, they can join. So what I hear are 2 points that you're making here. One is this thing like, what are the requirements for a label? What does each label mean? And that's a thing that this working group has to determine. And a second thing is a principle. That is, it's going to, wherever possible, it's going to reuse work that other people have already done. Does that capture what you're, okay. So does anyone disagree with those? Yes.
Not a disagreement, but I might be picking up also kind of developing a conceptual map as to when to apply, use these kinds of standards, right? So I'm looking at a geosync conceptual standards map here that does that kind of thing. So is that right? Is that, okay.
So you want a conceptual map of the standards out of this working group?
So that people know when to use them, how to use them, the time to use them, at what device level, systems level, network level, et cetera.
And you're saying that you've already found one. This could be a small bit of work then.
I have one here to give you an example of standards mapping on smart cities and open data, but just to see what the conceptual mapping could potentially look like and what that kind of database might actually look like.
So what I've written down here is a conceptual map of standards, know when to apply the standard to a device or service. Yep.
I think within that, though, again, as well as where there might be some gaps. I think identify, like, if there are gaps. I'm not sure that there are. There are a lot of standards out there. It could be just pointing to ones that are under development that might fit, or, yeah, so.
So one thing I can offer as an input, when we were doing this under ISO for the stuff that we're doing under Workgroup 10 for IoT and related technologies, was we created a mind map. And it's a huge mind map that we basically documented like everything for 2 years. It's still quite relevant. So what I can do is I can basically donate that to this group as an input, and that'll save you a lot of the research time to basically get us hit the ground running, and then we can take those pieces that we need. It's got a lot of the standards cataloged. It's got like all the sectors. It's got pretty much every single factor of IoT and related systems. And so from that, we can just use that, and that'll get us going.
So I want to point out that there are two pieces of information that came from that. The first thing is that we've got a mind map, and the second thing is that FOUD is going to participate in this working group. Okay, I've got here eight items for this label/info working group. I don't know what we're going to call it, but Alice. This working group has got 8 items here, right? We've got this question about whether to develop some sort of specification, whether to use some sort of specification, or whether to collaborate with somebody else who's already making one where it's not done yet. So that's the first thing that I think I heard. And I think that there was a very strong preference for using and collaborating, using even more than collaborating, because people seem to think that there's an awful lot of stuff out there, so we should just use the stuff as much as possible. This one seemed to be like kind of a bad idea unless we had like evidence that there was something really missing. We've got this question about how to interact with the providers of these things, and this seems to be like a key problem, and we figure that this is the person who's going to have it. We've got to identify some tests and develop them if they're needed. Testers, mechanisms for it, and so on, ongoing tests. We've got this question about the technical aspects of the label meaning, and I think that this is where in particular, this conceptual map of the standards is going to interact with this thing. Boy, I'm going to hit my head on that. That'll be entertaining for everyone. There's a strong principle to reuse other work, and this technical aspects of the label meaning and the requirements for a label. What does each label mean? Obviously, those are really pretty tightly related topics. Finally, we've got to identify any gaps in order to say, are there things that are missing in here? So that was what I heard. Does that sound like the charter of this working group that's going to develop these labels to say, here are what the label is going to be. This is the content. Was that a yes or no or okay? Okay, so this is one working group that we're going to have, and everybody's in agreement with this. They like this because there's a certain amount of turf here, right? That what's going to happen is we're dividing up the workspace, and we're going to say if somebody comes along with a good idea in awareness or comes along with a good idea in network resiliency, and it's about these topics, we're going to say, no, that should be developed by those people over there. They're already working on it, so that's where you should take it. And the reason for that is not so that we can encourage turf wars, because that's kind of boring. The idea is that we don't want to have competing things developed by two different people, and now we've got that aren't talking to one another. So the idea here is that if you have one of these topics, this is the group that you're going to work on with it. Okay, everybody's cool with this? Boffo. All right. The next one. See if I can tear this off without tearing the whole sheet. Oh, you're going to be my easel. Excellent. Ha! I do so remember how paper works. Okay, so our next group had to do with the awareness and education. So this was about awareness and education, and we had different targets for this thing. So one thing that I heard is that this is a group that's going to develop campaigns, communications campaigns for people. Is that a true thing? I can't tell if that's a no or a maybe or an ugh.
But that's certainly not what I want to do explicitly, but it's more to...
Okay, no, you absolutely should. This is a multi-stakeholder thing. I want to know what people think.
It's not about a campaign, it's about understanding, maybe developing guidelines, maybe some basic roadmaps, maybe some decision-making trees, things to concern with, pointing to the standards. It's essentially maybe a toolkit for cities or perhaps and consumers, and or any other kind of large technological system consumer procurement entity, so that they have something that can help them with the decision-making process when it comes to the time to acquire, to use, or to pay attention to, et cetera.
That's not how you spell decision. So I've written here toolkit for decision making. Is that a fair summary? That looks like a no.
So is this working group supposed to develop a communications campaign? I'd say no. This is not necessarily a campaign. I see it more in the lines of a program or a larger initiative that has a couple of components. Definitely communications is a part of it. Toolkit, product, services.
Before you go on, communications is a part of it, like actually doing the communicating or preparing
developing the communication component, the communication plan, the communication. If it's going to do the communication itself, that's another story.
Okay, so you want a communication plan?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm trying to write down items, right? So
yes, and so if what has to be developed, in my view, is a sort of like an umbrella of various elements that include a toolkit, that include products, that include perhaps services that form part of like something that's going to actually be delivered. Like the communications plan, in my view, is how and what are the messages, but there has to be content, products, toolkits, something, and that is to be determined. I just wanted to bring, like at the intellectual property office, and I'm going to throw it right in here. SIPO over the last year, like intellectual property was this like vague thing that nobody knew about, and all of a sudden it became hot. So over the last year, and for different reasons, it's like the IP strategy now brought this in as a core element, but basically over the last year, we've been working on an awareness and education campaign. So there's like webinars and in-person seminars and like online tools and toolkits and ways that you can define what you need and how you need it, like online, and also materials. So it's a combination of in somebody physically that can answer a phone at a call center, somebody that can physically interact with somebody in a library, and also the online tools and the opportunity for you to like scan something and get all the information. So it's not just like now that we're all online, we're gonna just, it has to be like this multi-prong approach, and there has to be something at the end. So at the end, what is it that you're getting? Is it a manual? Is it a toolkit? Is it a video? A something?
So this working group is going to develop those materials, but not, I assume, answer the phone, right?
Well,
I am not signing up to answer the phone, by the way. I don't even answer my own phone.
Well, I mean, I don't know if this working group is going to develop the materials, or is it going to develop the outline of what a toolkit or the material should be, and see who is
excellent question. Okay, good.
And who's going to develop is somebody else.
Okay.
But if you define that you need a communication plan and you need a toolkit and this is the characteristics and this is has to focus and this is the audience, that is what I thought this and why,
Okay, so if I could distinguish that, that sounds to me like the distinction between developing the materials and developing the, or what I guess I might say the requirements for what those materials would be. Is that a fair way, a distinction?
Correct.
Okay, so.
They're different skills.
Well, I agree. So what I'm trying to narrow down what the working group's going to do. So who thinks that it's going to develop the materials? Well, let me ask the full question. Okay, and who thinks it's going to develop the requirements for the materials? So some people think both. Some people think only the requirements. Some people don't know what I mean. And then there were a lot of people who didn't respond at all. So I think what I've got is a hand here, and a hand here, and a hand here, and a hand there. Okay, so I think you were first.
Yeah, can we, sorry, this is Taylor Bentley from ISED. Why don't we just apply the same principle from the previous working group, which is use what people are already using. And I think that may help you answer that question, whether or not you're developing content. Because the first question would be, are you developing content that someone has already developed?
Right.
As far as a plan, that's, I would imagine, less treaded territory, but there may be gaps in the existing content. My colleague from OCA mentioned the functionality element of, what are typically privacy and security discussions. But even that was already in the Consumers International report. So I would say at some point we need to include the principle of do not duplicate, map things out, identify gaps.
Who else did I have? Let's go across the room. So we were here.
Actually, I was pretty much going to say it.
Oh, okay. Okay. And you were next.
Hussein Badran, I agree 100% that we should look at what already exists and try to tailor it or modify it or add to it. And also we need to identify which category of user groups we are addressing. The comment from a enterprise perspective or a smart city perspective is fine, but we should not forget about the individual user and different categories of different users, at least from an age perspective. The level of understanding, level of information capturing will be different, and the message has to be tailored so that it can be useful. Ultimately, we are focusing on having an impact, and the message needs to be clear and impactful so that we can see some success.
I'm going to write down while you make your remarks. Please go ahead. Oh, I didn't see you too. So let's just do that. No, it's okay. You're fine, and then we'll.
When you summarized this earlier, your comments were that this group needed to figure out specifically who we wanted to target, what types of products we wanted to target, and what kind of messages that we wanted to target. So privacy, security, and we had mentioned functionality. The concept about the smart city is a very different than individual products. So I do think we really need to think about. I mean, there's a huge difference between the consumer angle and the citizen angle. And from the consumer angle, I'm really hoping that we can nail down. There's already a lot of really good information on security tips, privacy tips, checklists, and stuff that we could use as a starting point so that we can help consumers say, this is what you need to know, or the questions you should be asking before you buy these products. Then you bring it home. Here are a few things you should know just when you're setting it up. And then something goes wrong. This is where you go for help. That's what you can do to inspire confidence in these products. And at the end of the day, that's what we want. We want consumers to be confident in using these things. It's good for business. It's good for consumers.
Hi, my name is Franca Palazzo. I went last, so now everyone's said what I.
Oh.
But I just want to. I agree with you, and the one piece that I do think is really important is that the comms piece, because at the end of the day, whatever we come up with, if we don't at least indicate a framework as to all of those, who are we targeting, and what the message is, then we're doing it for nothing. At the end of the day, citizens are who we want to help and who need to understand how IoT can affect them.
So I think what I'm hearing, before I turn to Alan, I think what I'm hearing is that we have to identify the audience, the kinds of things that we're going to apply to, which presumably are partly determined by that labeling and info thing before. But there is this problem, of course, that you can't really put a label on a sidewalk. So there's a gap there that this thing doesn't cover, and we need to identify what kinds of messages need to be sent. That is the requirements for the message. Because then we can identify the things that are already prepared and identify any gaps. Is that a fair summary of what I've just heard in this room? Okay, so I've got two things. Alan was first, and
Yes, I think you may have already captured it, but I think it's worth saying out loud. I don't envisage this process continuing indefinitely. I don't envisage this group or some derivative of it actually undertaking an education and awareness campaign itself. Rather, it will do the best it can to demonstrate the potential effectiveness and the value in said information and awareness campaign. So to that end, while it may involve, for example, developing sample messages like to illustrate what could be done, I see it more, to use your words, develop the requirements for the messages, to make the case for the value of education and awareness, perhaps look at what other countries have done, for example, and to point at, like you could, magazines or whatever, but not to actually develop the specific campaign itself. That's certainly the way I see this, so I wouldn't see the artwork or whatever. So that's how I'm conceptualizing this myself.
okay. I think Tracy's next, yeah, and then Walter.
So I agree with that, and for me, a toolkit is all of those things. A toolkit is a gap analysis. You do some research. You have a gap analysis. You point to the resources that you have. You find your target users, et cetera, et cetera. So really, there may be some opportunities to, if there are some gaps that are identified, that maybe something has to be written up. Whether it's this group or this group seeks the right forum that does that writing up is something that would have to be considered. But to me, that's what a toolkit is. It's doing all of those kinds of things.
I think, well, oh, sorry. Go ahead, and then we'll come to you. Okay.
Yeah, it's Hossein Badran. Just thinking out loud, I agree that perhaps we should not be the one who's doing the actual artwork, but we see ourselves maybe commissioning that to be done by a third party. I know ISOC has developed lots of tools for similar purposes. Maybe ISOC can take the lead in developing or subcontracting in somebody else. I think it would be very useful to see a final outcome at the end of the process. Doesn't matter who is doing it, but make sure that the messages that we are developing and the requirements we're developing see the end of the tunnel, something concrete that's developed and being shared, at least to gauge success. I mean, how are you going to gauge success with just the requirements in a paper? I don't think it would be enough.
Thanks. I just want to clarify, maybe there's an implicit assumption about who we are educating and making aware. Like, is there an implicit assumption that it's the users of IoT, or does it also include the providers of IoT? So I'm thinking like startups, right? A lot of startups just come up, right? They don't necessarily know the landscape, so there ought to be some kind of communications towards the providers as well in terms of security, et cetera. So is there an implicit assumption here, or is it the breadth of the stakeholders in IoT?
Well, I don't intend it to be implicit. So what I've written here below the toolkit for decision making, I've got this communication plan. So message requirements, we've got to identify the audience, identify kinds of things to talk about, identify the content already out there. And so then that would fall under this identify the audience.
Right,
What
so
kind of audience do you
instead
need?
of just users.
Yes.
Thanks.
And then finally, I've got this item on here, do not develop the campaigns as such. This is the point that I think Alan just made very strongly, but I think many people seem to agree with that, and that seems reasonable to me because, people have, it's somebody else apart from the working group who's going to do this. That doesn't mean that somebody else doesn't get commissioned to do it or whatever. And then finally, we had this idea that I haven't mentioned so far on here of identifying things that haven't been done yet, right? This is the gap identification. Okay, so those are 4 things that I've heard so far. And I guess implicit on here, maybe instead of this being a thing that we write on each one, we should have this general principle, just reuse stuff as much as possible. So reuse things that, right, the not invented here syndrome is toxic, and we shouldn't embrace it. So is that a fair summary of what we've heard so far? Okay, so I can put this up, but I mean, we have more paper. I've got only 4 things on here, and it surprises me that this is the one that people had the most to say. This education and awareness group was the one that people seemed to have the most to say about in the time before the break, and yet we have half as much stuff up there that we're going to do as on the first one, at least because that's the way I've written the numbers.
Can you read again?
I can. So the first thing was this idea of a toolkit for decision making, and then as we broke that out, we said, okay, we've got a kind of communication plan that we need to develop. So we develop the requirements for a message, we identify the audience, we identify the kinds of things that we're talking about. So right, we've got, you know, like your thermostat in your house and the sidewalk of sidewalk labs. Those are different kinds of things, I think, and they need different kinds of messages, different requirements for them. We're going to identify the content that's already out there, the point that you've made quite eloquently. So this is the sort of plan that we're going to have. Then we've got a general requirement not to develop campaigns as such, and we got to identify gaps. But I can see that you're dissatisfied, so use the mic, please.
No, because I'm not. I also had mentioned like to define, and that's where we got to the not develop but to define.
Okay.
I call it products and services. Like when you talk about the communication campaign, for me it's more like the plan of the messaging and so on and so forth. But in what I'm thinking that, because here you have the toolkit for decision making, and I'm not really sure I understand exactly what you mean by that.
Well, I don't mean it. I think it was Tracy, so maybe
Okay,
she can
so
say more
Tracy
about that.
can expand, but in the communication plan and when you mention all the things there, I would want to add products and services to do the awareness and education. Like, I mean, is it going to be a video? Is it going to be a, sorry, not that we develop delivery mechanisms. I call it product service delivery mechanism. Is it, does the group propose that there's online videos of blah, blah, blah of these items? Or
Okay.
as somebody was mentioning there, a video of when you receive a product, you do, what is it? To think about that. Is it going to be an online 40-page document? Is it going to be whatever? So that, I call it products and services. What did you call it? Delivery mechanism. It's is the both. No. I'm talking about no. It's the thing and how. You're talking about the how. I'm talking about the thing. Suppose it's a video online. That's what I'm saying. I don't know, but I think we have to think about that.
Okay.
Yeah,
So-
right, that's a campaign, and we just said no to campaign.
No, we're not doing it. We in the communications plan that you mentioned. For me, and what I understand, a communications plan is, okay, this is going to be the messaging, this is going to be the audience for this.
Right.
I did not know if the what and the how is captured. If you tell me that after that definition of that plan, of the communication plan, we propose that there's educational videos that are distributed, blah, 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 and that's captured there, not that we're going to do it.
I think it's not, so I think I heard some other people who are objecting to that, so why don't we hear some more from that? So I think, Tracy, because also there was a question for you, so you get a double bang and then you.
Woohoo! All right, so early on, prior to getting to the sheet, we had said something like consumer, public sector procurement, and deployment in public space kind of guideline decision-making toolkit. So that's what that is, and we'd have to, as a group, develop the charter that's related to that. We said that we would not have a communications campaign, but you're suggesting maybe requirements for things that could be useful for communication, but not develop the communication campaign. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, there you go. So we got that sorted out. That's it, I think.
Thanks. And all I was reflecting on was the fact that we had said develop the requirements, not the campaign. And to me, the products and services are the pieces of the campaign. So that, we just have to come to a decision. Are we actually designing this? Or as it was mentioned, do we provide the requirements and then the people who would know how to deliver it, maybe ISOC as an example, would put the specifics into the plan? We just have to decide.
Okay, so I've got Timur and then Kim. Oh, okay.
Whatever is the way of writing the idea, in my mind, a communication plan, if the working group is doing the requirements and we decide that for a certain age group there could be a video, it doesn't mean that what I'm saying is that we don't have to develop the video. We just have to say that we've identified that, for example, for this age group or for this element, these could be the possible, and we could define, and it could be online, it should be in person, we think that there should be a course at the library. It doesn't mean that we have to define the course, and it doesn't mean we have to deliver it, but that's what I'm saying in that. I don't know if it's captured already, but just to identify these types of things, as we look at the matrix of age and things and elements. Audience, the elements, whatever.
Okay, so I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sorry, you were 4.
I'm just gonna pick up on what Kim was saying. I don't really know how to frame it because it's the terminology of, again, to me also of products and services is just has a different connotation, and I know that's probably just from where I come from. But like the idea of like doing that, like what is the, are there some ideal types of mechanisms like school educational, like lesson plans or something like that. Or do we not think that lessons plans are going to be useful because, like, doing that type of analysis of like what types of communication service mechanisms would best address specific types of information gaps that we identify might be useful. Whereas I was thinking initially that the communication plan was more of a meta thing, and maybe I just misunderstood this, but it was more like, does there need to be a helpline somewhere that responds to, not are we going to make a helpline, but does there need, and maybe I'm actually like maybe they're really the same thing, I don't know, and not two separate things.
So I think to answer that, I think very clearly the agreement so far has been that this working group is not going to set up a helpline. But this working group might identify helpline needed.
Yes.
I think that's
what we want. The requirements of a communication plan, not the actualization.
Yes.
Production of the products of the communication. Thanks for products. Yes.
okay.
I don't know what we mean. We call them products and services.
Okay.
But I mean, what we mean, for example, a product.
Okay, we're going to come back to you because you don't have the mic. It's like the talking stick.
Sorry. I'm gonna also cheat, and my other one was, but I'm wondering though, like whether for the toolkit itself, and I know we shouldn't be, there might be information already to cultivate, I don't want to say make or develop or create, cultivate a toolkit or something like that, or like if we get into it and we find that most of the information to create a toolkit is there with a little bit of extra stuff and people are willing to put work into that, I feel like it might be worth leaving that. Whereas we all agree that we can't create a helpline and we don't, unless some of us have hidden acting talents, we don't want to make videos. That might be something that might be worth leaving, or at least thinking about whether it's worth something that we can contribute as an output as well. And it'll come down to what is actually out there already. If there's enough out there that we can just add a little bit to it.
So I have you, then Pam, then, no? Oh, okay.
Hi, it's Pam Miller from ISED. Just to say, I think we'd like to see something that could be implemented at the end of the process. So I think having it too high level that simply we should or could do this is not enough, that it has to be something tangible enough that it could be implemented. So we wouldn't be the group that would be implementing, but you could pass it off to recommendations to ISOC, to any one of the multi-stakeholder groups in this room, to universities, to ISED, but with clear enough guidance that it's something that could be implemented, whether that's key messages or guidelines or a segmentation of who should be targeted, but tangible and concrete enough that we could actually action the outcome.
Okay, now hang on while I get the cue. You're next, definitely. And then I had Alan, and I had you, and then I have you and you. Did I catch everybody? Okay, good.
I actually was going to say pretty much the same thing. My concern is that at the end of the day, I think we want to raise the bar, and if we're developing a plan that isn't implemented, or we don't have a partner to deliver on it, then at the end of the day, we'll have a wonderful plan, but we won't meet any objective. And our objective is raising the bar for consumers to make better decisions, and that can't be done unless it's implemented. So we need to make sure we have that mechanism to implement it if we're not doing it ourselves.
Okay. Yes, Alan was next.
Yes, it's Alan McGilvery. So just a couple of short comments. I'm concerned that communications plan has overtaken the notion of education and awareness. They're not the same thing. And so I certainly accept that there would be a plan. But like here's an example. Training for frontline retail staff in electronic stores. Now, that's not in a communications plan, but that I think is something that certainly would want to be considered. So I think you have to clearly, there are really, as someone said, delivery mechanism. In box one is the message, right? Labeled product, good. Unlabeled product, bad, okay? And all of the stuff around that. Then in the next box is how do we get those messages out directly or indirectly to the consumer to allow an informed decision. So so maybe there's research somewhere that says people who buy webcams never read newspapers. So then you don't suggest using newspaper ads to inform and educate or something like that. But in other words, you provide some guidance on getting the message out, but you're not saying, yes, we should do a quarter-page ad buy in the Globe and Mail every quarter, and, right? So that's way down the road, but to the extent you can help whoever's going to implement this deal with that, I think that would be useful. Thank you.
And Rob is next.
I just want to agree with Alan on that. And to this, it really does come down to, as Taylor was mentioning, the delivery mechanism is one aspect of it, and it can be articulated in the plan as well. But we just have to decide, is it going to be an end deliverable, or is it a set of requirements? And having this discussion, we're probably never going to get to the actual working groups. So that's what I think. Some of these things could be handled within the working group itself, so that we can cross-educate each other.
Strongly agree with that. Okay, so we come over here, you're next, and then back across the back. So then I've got you and you.
Hi, so I just have a question. I would like some clarification. When you say toolkit for decision making, so being one of the organizations that would hope to actually implement at the end of this, I would like to see that toolkit mean the kind of content that I can draw on to then develop the campaigns. Is that correct? Perfect.
Okay. So you're next anyway.
Yes, yes, and yes. So it's a toolkit. The toolkit could contain a decision tree. It could contain a fact sheet. We don't know what it will contain. It will be targeted at different users, the consumer, the city, and different individual age groups that were brought up earlier that would be decided at the working group level. And then the scan of existing material, from the scan of existing material, that is what would go actually, those actual objects would go into the toolkit, they'd be described, et cetera, and or what they talk about would be discussed. the gaps that would be identified, the things that we haven't seen in this kind of material. This is where new material may have to be prepared. And then how the different products are created would be recommendations and perhaps requirements of the group. But the toolkit could be many different things, and I really do think it really should be at the working group level that that's figured out. And often you can't figure those things out until you've done a scan of what actually exists. So I would say that maybe instead of kind of trying to finalize what that thing is, because you used the word toolkit early on to kind of go through the list of all the things I'd said earlier. We can stick with that and figure it out at the working group level, I think.
And you're next. And have I missed anybody? Oh, okay.
So if the toolkit is then what's going to contain what I call products and services, then perhaps we have to put a toolkit for decision making, but also to what the toolkit is at the core of the identification of the awareness and education pieces. I agree with Alan in the sense, like, I just want to identify that in our jargon at CEPO, a service is a call center, like somebody that will provide a service. That's a service. Somebody that does one-on-one consultations that you can book a meeting with is a service. A product is a one-pager. And what I think the working group is, for example, is there a requirement to demystify the security threat of the toaster that's connected to the internet? So that's an item that will require the development of a one-pager that can be available at the libraries, and there could be what I see is there's an identification that there's an opportunity for a 1-minute video or a 10-second video, like whiteboard video, to show how to turn off or turn on whatever. So what I call products and services, they call them things or elements or content. Perhaps it's in the toolkit that can be actually, I want to, if you want to call it toolkit, that's fine, but it's more like what are the products and services that will support awareness and education.
So what I've identified here, because I think that this came out of the previous discussion, I've tried to write this in a way that will cut across the dialects of people. I've written, identify good mechanisms for the message, and I put in parentheses products and services to identify that as the same thing. Does that capture what we're talking about?
Yes, it does, but just to take a clarification, the content, like the pieces, the products, is one thing, and the mechanisms of delivery is another part of it. So, for example, the one-pager, is it online or is it at the library? Is the education, for example, is the education on something going to be in a webinar? Is it a seminar? Is it something that the call center is going to deliver? It doesn't matter. It's to be defined, but it's products, services, and mechanisms of delivery.
Okay. And here.
Chris Parsons. This is probably implicit in much of this, but and maybe it belongs or doesn't. But in the work that we do at the lab, where we do build out projects where other people can just pick them up and walk with them and take them wherever they want to take them around the world, one of the things that we have found very helpful in building out these sort of guidelines is the resources required for discrete elements. So I'm picturing it's a multi-stakeholder environment. Some people might be able to implement pieces and not others. And so when people are building out, the toolkits or, however this looks, just to envision what kind of resources are required. Maybe a small NGO can do a one-pager or a webinar, but the federal government of Canada is required to run a call center or something like that. Just to make it a little bit more actionable for the parties that might actually be picking this up and be motivated to do it. So they're not doing their own resource evaluations, and they can pick up what's already there.
So I've written that down as identify resources needed for each item. Is that fair? Okay. And I didn't miss, by the way, the actionable thing up here. I wrote that down. Okay, so look at that. We got to 7.
I kind of feel 2 is at least 5 or 6 on it.
Fair enough. This could be many items underneath that. So now what we've got is this toolkit for decision making. We seem to have spent a lot of time sort of expanding what toolkit means. Maybe I shouldn't have used that word in the first place. And this includes some sort of communication plan, and that includes this message requirements. We've got to identify the audience, the identification of the kinds of things we're going to talk about. That is the appropriate message for the appropriate kind of thing that we're talking about. And we've got to identify the stuff that's already available. So the things that people have already made, and maybe put that all up together so that you can do that. We've got this principle that shouldn't develop the campaigns as such. And I still hear people hanging on to that, so I feel comfortable with it. Obviously, we want to identify gaps. And that sort of necessarily follows really from all of this, right? This is kind of an entailment more than anything else. We have this idea of identifying the mechanisms that the various kinds of messages ought to have. So this is the products and services identification part. You don't build them, but you identify what they are. Whatever this is, it's got to be actionable. So somebody needs to be able to pick this up and take it away at the end of this and be able to go and run with it so that it's a useful thing. You don't want to spend a lot of time. And this is, by the way, this is a super important point for multi-stakeholder things in general, right? Whenever you're trying to do this, you better have something that people feel like they're working on something that's going to result in something. I will say personally that this is because my boss will fire me if I don't actually do something that they can point to later. And finally, there's this idea that you should identify what it takes to deliver any kind of item so that people trying to pick this thing up can know, oh, I could do that one, or that one requires the resources of a nation state, or the resources of a small dark star, or whatever. Well, some of the proposals that people make about the Internet of Things, right? Okay, we're going to boil this ocean and all of the possible oceans on Jupiter. And it seems like that's an important thing to understand. Okay, are there any other things that we think that this education and awareness group ought to be working on? Have I missed anything that people have said? Yes?
It's Alan. I think you should have the messages as a separate bullet.
Okay. I mean, we're going to rewrite this, right? This is not the form in which the charters are going to be put up because sticky notes at wall size, not good for the internet. But I will make that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to underline this message requirements here so that it's clear that that's a sort of high-level primary thing. How's that? Okay, this is the emergent charter of another working group that you're going to be on the hook to sign up for. Remember, locking the doors, passing the clipboard around. How am I doing on time?
25 minutes.
I got 25 minutes to talk about the network resiliency piece. So this was the third working group that we talked about, and this is about how to make devices resilient in the face of the network and how to make the network resilient in the face of the devices. At least I think it's both. Not everybody agrees with me. That may be the first point of contention. So, do people agree that it needs to go both ways, or do they think that those are just different topics with different people on them? So I gave you a so you know that a disjunction is true just in case only one of the items. So you think that actually both ways is in.
You need to protect the IoT device from the network, and you need to protect the network from IoT device.
Okay,
Yes.
Good. So what is this working group going to do about that?
I think one thing to make clear is the difference between the standards piece and the resilience piece. I see the standards as kind of setting our baseline, our floor, if you will, and the resilience piece setting out the best practices or the ceiling. So let's identify concrete set of recommendations for like the best of the best system.
So you're arguing that this is if I put my propeller hat on, this is recommendations for operations and management, and it's not standard setting.
Correct.
Yep.
We made one.
Good.
Sorry.
I've got two people here, so that's good. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think ultimately we want to make sure there are standards that address this.
Okay.
So we'd be doing requirements, we'd be doing inputs to that standards process, we'd be looking for partners, at least in my opinion, and gaps. Thank you.
And in relation to that, I would just add that I think the goal for me on this would just to create like a white paper that basically takes all of that collective thoughts and then just puts it out there on, you know, the two topics, then what are the guidance for doing it. I think that's more than anything what the industry needs. And I have just a side question. I'm going to throw a curveball at everybody. So we've got all these different groups working in silos. The one thing I can see as possibly being a problem is there's a lot of carryover between the different groups. How do we ensure that the group one is talking to group two, making sure that there's cross collaboration, talking to work group three to make sure the communication pieces or the awareness pieces are there? Just as a process piece, completely separate to what you're doing right now, how do we ensure that there's that continuity of messaging and stuff, and everyone's staying on the same topic and the same message? That would be a concern of mine.
So to answer that question, that's the multi part of multi-stakeholder. And what that often means is multi-groups. So one way that this happens in practice is that you've got somebody who's interested in two topics and they're paying attention to both. And then when a topic comes up in one place, and it impinges on something that's going on in the other place, that person has the responsibility to say, you know, those other people are going in completely the other direction, and we ought to spend some time working with them. The problem with the internet, right, is that there are no police. The good thing of the internet is that there are no internet police, and the bad thing about the internet is there are no internet police. And the reason that that's a good and bad thing is because it allows this sort of flexible use, the smarts are at the end and everything like that. But the problem, of course, is that, this kind of problem can frequently have giant gaps and people do everything in the wrong way and so on. So what we have to do is we've got to have people who are participating across these sorts of things. We got to make sure that some people, at least, are paying attention to at least two groups, right? So you've got intersections across the whole space. If you don't have intersections across the whole space, then I completely agree with you. But I am not in charge, so I can't make anybody do this. That's one of the constant problems here. So while the mic is coming over, I'll just say what I've written down so far is we've got this goal: protect the net from things and protect the things from the net. Then we've got 2, that this is operations and management guidance, and 3, that it's got to identify requirements for standards but not make standards. So far, that's what I think I've heard. Go ahead.
Just a suggestion, short of having people participate in more than one group, each group could identify 2 liaisons that could then meet, two very dedicated people, right, who could then meet to share a report on what their group's working on. And then you don't have to worry, because that way they're getting information from all 3 groups as opposed to 2.
Right. And different bodies do these things different ways. Sometimes people rely on it being casual. Sometimes people rely on it being explicit. It's somebody's job to do this. One difficulty that we have in the multi-stakeholder world is that, right, everybody is strictly speaking a volunteer. It's very hard to compel volunteers to do their job. Try firing a volunteer, for instance. That's a fun day. So that can be one of the difficulties. And I think that that's something that the working groups are going to have to work out amongst themselves. I think some of these things, right, I think it's pretty obvious that the network resilience people may be, there's going to be some overlap between that and the people who want to make labels, because they're going to be people who are working in both things, right? People who are suppliers or something like that. I'm a little more worried about this working group and, say, the education and awareness one. Go ahead.
So another thing we're talking about, in addition to the white paper, would be building prototype of what we want and running code. So to have actual IoT devices that are safe from the internet and they're protected from the internet, and to show how labels would work, how QR code would work, and making the instead of just having instead of talking. If we're going to raise awareness and education, we should have the real thing that we can actually test it on before, and then say this is how it should work.
So this is interesting. We've now got geeks at war. One group of people want to build a prototype. They want to build a proof of concept, and other people think that we're just producing guidance. So this is the way we do this among engineers. Who's willing to donate code to this? Okay, we've got people willing to donate code. Excellent. That's what we're doing now, folks. Once people are willing to donate code, running code wins. So, so if we actually get code, the code is what's going to happen. And I think that's marvelous. I saw 4 different hands at least go up. That's an amazing story. I know that doesn't sound like very many but actually that's a fantastic sign. That tells me actually people are devoted to working on this and are going to work on ways to show that it actually operates. That's A+. So I'm going to put on here, I'm going to put on this charter, proof of concept code. All right? Yes. Oh, we need a mic. And I'm out of paper. Well, maybe I don't need it yet.
Thank you very much. So, Sam Badran, I think one thing we're missing in the information of our group is the service provider side. Last meeting we had at least one of them in the room. I think it would be critical to have a service provider in the discussion to complement our point of view as user or our architects of the network. Actually, a service provider who builds the network and runs and operates it. So what we're recommending is actually has some acceptance from an operator point of view.
So I think we have at least one. Yeah.
Oh, you are from. Yeah. Okay, you're here. Okay. Wasn't sure.
But does that mean that we should identify participants for this, or? So this is an interesting point, actually, that we have not identified who the necessary participants are in any of these yet. But this is actually an interesting point, right? That one problem that you can have in the multi-stakeholder world is that one of the critical stakeholders doesn't show up, and then you do all this work, and then it turns out that when you go and talk to them, they say, "Well, we're not doing any of that." Because, right, like most volunteer things, right, when somebody's not at the meeting, they get all the work. So that can be a problem. So maybe what we need to do, actually, is identify for all of these who needs to be there. Okay. So are there other things that this resilience thing has to do? Right now, I've got 2 goals. We've got to protect the net from the things, and we've got to protect the things from the net. And we're going to do that by producing operations and management guidance rather than standards. But got to identify requirements for standards. So if there are gaps in the standards, we can say to the various standards development organizations, "Hey, SDOs, we don't care which of you has the talking stick here, but somebody's got to build this standard." And then finally, this is a group that's actually going to produce proof of concept code as well as recommendations. So that's all I've got for it right now. Is that the complete story for this working group? The charter, anyway. Obviously, the work has to be done.
But do you want a communications plan? He said he was going to feed into the awareness and education to raise awareness.
Well, that's the point of.
You haven't got the talking stick, Sean. I just think I happen to know what Jacques is talking about, but I feel that when one person's network is not the same as another person's network, I've got 3 laptops, a printer, and a router at home, and that's a network.
Yep.
And and there are 65,000 ASs in the world, and that's another network. So I think we better make sure that we're all talking network on the same scale.
Well, I think I would offer a friendly amendment to that. That is, we better be talking about networks on different scales because they've got different kinds of problems. Okay? So I've got 2 people in the queue.
Going to mention that Jack also mentioned that they were going to provide input to the awareness and education to increase the awareness and education on these things that they're going to be looking into. They can develop the content for the pieces.
Jacques is saying, no, I'm not developing any content. But you wanted the talking stick. Go ahead.
What I said is we can be consulted, or our input can be provided to, our output can be used to feed your input to build the content.
Absolutely.
But no, we're not building training programs and stuff.
Okay.
Super naive question. Where are the people?
Where are the people?
There's an IoT and a network, but where are the people? You've talked about things, you've not talked about people in there. Like, you're doing this for the purpose of not just the network and not just the things, but also things for people, no? Again, it's a naive question on my part. So
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, I was just going to make a comment to that as well, just to disambiguate the whole topic. Just put down network resilience, and that restricts it to network facing and device network functionality, as opposed to the external world where the people are involved. I assume that's what it is.
So this is a nice ambiguity in here, isn't it? Go ahead. Well, I'm trying to send the stick towards you. It's like a current flowing.
Having been in the standards process for 6 years, trying to define this, it's implicit, right? Because IoT is cyber physical. And so it's almost implicit that there's a potential human or a dog or whatever attached to this thing in some way, shape, or form, or can interact with it. And so you can't necessarily, you have to really pull back, and you have to look at, IoT is so different in so many ways because of, you could be here, but it's a component that's in the other side of the planet, but yet you're the human who's touching it here. So it's implicit. And that's what we had to learn to think about when we were looking at IoT, is it does have all of these groupings that need to be considered, and you can't just put it into groups, because if you try to do that and you try to break it out, you're just going to lose your mind. I swear to God. Like, we've been down that road, and you can argue that one for days and days, and we have in multiple IoT group meetings in ISO and IEC. So I just want to save us that effort, okay? It's implicit that those things are there. I think when I share our mind map that we came up with, a lot of that stuff you'll go, oh yeah. And then you understand conceptually just how big this thing is, because it's big. And then you start to say, okay, now you can start to conceptually understand the elements you need to consider when we're working through this. And I think once you see that, it makes sense to some of the stuff we're focusing on. We're not going to try to boil the ocean. I think by focusing on these 3 areas, we focus on the stuff that I think that it's important to, I think, our group, and then also what's important to Canadians, both consumers and business, and that's it. Like, and that's all we do for this point. And I think that'll keep us quite busy for the next couple of years, and then we figure out what's next. So let's not try to boil the ocean. I would say keep it simple. Right? Understand just how big this is and the concepts that are included when we say IoT, and don't try to just break everything out, because if you do, it'll get ugly and just deter the group from really what we need to focus on.
So can I try to pull a thread out of this, which is, it sounds to me like there is a thing that needs to happen here from this working group, and that is this clear meaning of what resilience means for these purposes, right? That And we can pull that to a certain extent, I think, out of this mind map. But we need to make sure that the working group is clear about what it means when it says we're going to be resilient, we're going to protect this device from the network or so on. And so you're next because you had a comment first.
On the user part, I think the education awareness is covering a lot of what the user is expecting and should be expected from network, on his behavior part as well. So I think we are covered, should be covered there without complicating things too much. And I agree with Fuad that complicating too much will not be beneficial. Okay. Hopefully, sometime we'd like to see the gaps that we have in the groups in terms of presence of stakeholders, who should be targeting to just make sure that we have the full picture of what we're trying to address.
Right. Okay, so Fawad next, and then Tracy.
Thank you. So the other point I would probably make clear is, if you look at just where ISO and IEC and just a lot of groups are, even IEEE, resilience is a component of what's called trustworthiness, right? So then the question is, are we just breaking out resilience, or are we going to start talking about trustworthiness? Because trustworthiness is security, it's privacy, it's resilience, it's a whole bunch of availability, there's a whole bunch of other aspects. So that's the kind of stuff I'm worried about, because I'd rather, if we're going to talk about resilience, do we talk about network trustworthiness? Because that's really what, if you look at everywhere else, that's what they're talking about. They've basically grouped all of those things into that one topic.
So I think that this group was intended to be restricted, but I'd be interested to hear what other people have to say. I think you were next.
So when I said people, it wasn't to add complicated, it was really for me to conceptually understand. So really, it really was a question of concept. But I guess the follow-up from that is that, and your response is completely fine, because again, I'm naive in that particular component of things. But then where does agency come in, right? So who has responsibility for what? So, or which organization or which institution, and who oversees and who pays attention to resiliency, who manages trust, and who's a trusted agent in this space? I guess it's more, when I'm thinking of the people part, I'm thinking of that. Because it's not just a device to a network, there's people that intervene along the way. I didn't necessarily mean user, but it's that agency piece, that responsibility piece, that authoritative piece related to it. And if it's, what I'm suggesting makes no sense in the context of this, then we can stop the conversation here. But if there is something that makes sense, or if there's something I need to understand, we can either do it offline or address it here. I don't want to complicate it and belabor it, is what I'm saying.
So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that, first of all, was why I thought this was limited to resilience, because we were trying to contain it so that it didn't turn into the trustworthiness problem. But the second thing that I would say is we've got 5 minutes left in this section, and we do want to get to that thing of who needs to be involved in these things. So the thing that I would say in response to this piece of this discussion is that the least formed of the proto charters that we have here, I think, is this working group. Because I think that this working group is going to have to decide whether it wants to be narrow and focused on the small set of things that we've just listed, which I think is a fine thing to do. A narrow working group that achieves something is an achievement, after all. Or whether it wants to expand its topic and probably its lifetime. So that's something that I think the working group needs to sort out. So, all the way over here, does it fit? Yes. For this network resilience thing, we've got these goals. We're going to protect the network from the things, and we're going to protect the things from the network. So it's a strict resilience thing, and I take the point about trustworthiness being a larger topic into which this plays, but this is this narrow topic. We said that we're going to produce operations and management guidance rather than standards, but we're going to identify gaps in the standards so that, if there are things that need to be developed, we send that off to standards developed organizations. People committed to providing proof of concept code, that's A+. We're going to need to narrow this down so that we make sure that resilience doesn't expand to take on all of trustworthiness, and make sure that we keep that topic nice and tight so that people understand what it is, so that the education and awareness working group, for instance, can take this and understand what the boundaries and limitations are of the recommendations that come from here. And once again, I just put here, for the usual thing, you want to use as much as possible other people's work. Now, we said that we had to identify key stakeholders that need to appear in each one of these things. So, who needs to be in this labeling group first? Who do we need there? Nobody knows? Who here wants to participate in this labeling thing? I'm not taking your names yet, so... Okay, so that gives us some sectors who need to be there, right? Because those are some stakeholders who think they need to be there. Really, nobody's going to tell me. So I think, look, if this is a labeling thing, we've definitely got to have people who know what the things are, right? We need to know the people who know what the things are. They need to know what they're making. So either they've got to be providers of these things, or people who are working in the area, or vendors of them, or something like that, right? That's one group of people who need to be there. Okay? Yep.
Someone who's familiar with the standards making process and has been kind of tracking, like, so this is not a technical thing, but more of a meta thing, like what's happening in some of the other bodies, because even just starting to dig into that can sometimes take a while for people who are not generally familiar. Okay. And I think also someone from the consumer perspective to make, to provide that as well, even though that's probably more something that's primarily in the education, but also someone with a consumer perspective would be helpful here as well.
Okay, hand the mic backwards.
Sorry. Probably the IoT alliances.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is that we need IoT alliances, which is going to include right, people who are making these things and people who are selling them and so on. We need people who are familiar with the standards development work in this area, and we need some people who understand what consumer needs are. That is, what are the consumer sectors of this stuff, or what are the user sectors, the people who are influenced by it. One of the things that's interesting to me is that what didn't come up here are the citizens. That is, the citizens groups who can identify stuff that is going to affect you. Because there's a whole problem here about this labeling and info, right? We said labeling, we spent a lot of time talking about, oh, is it a blue label or a green label or whatever, but you can't do that with a sidewalk or a light pole, but you're still going to have some kind of information, because this, remember, was supposed to be the content that is supposed to be combined with the plan that we're going to have in the other thing. So somebody's going to have something to say about that. So I think that there is some sort of citizen interest group or something like that that needs to be involved here, right? Yeah, humans, right? I think most of the people who would volunteer would be humans, but I mean, then there are the geeks. So, yep.
Trusted certification bodies?
So you want certification bodies. So these are.
The labels and the certification, I would imagine they would be related, but I'm.
So you need basically standards. Well, so industry standards organizations, right? Okay. Anything else needs to go here? I know we're over time, but we're going to have to. We got to plow through this bit.
No problem.
All right. So for the education and awareness, I think pretty obviously we've got the people who are representing those who need the education to them, and we need the people who are going to produce messages. Who else?
I would like to see somebody from actually the education system itself, Ministry of Education or Education Board, somebody who's responsible for delivering education curricula to students, that we can get guidance with his expertise, what would be the right tools to use. He can also influence tailoring the messages themselves. I think that would be useful.
Okay? So educators as such, like the formal educator people.
Civil society groups, consumer groups,
See-
partners, sorry, Kim. I'm thinking citizens groups, civil society groups, that might be other consumer groups, and identifying partners that will be the ones that will be delivering the awareness and education.
So do you need them to be participating in the development of this, or do you need to do that as part of the work?
Depends, depending on the partner. It could be a municipal, it could be government, it could be industry. I'm not sure yet, but there has to be the partners, at least key stakeholders that will be delivering or assisting in the delivering.
Okay. Did I see your hand or not? Okay, so I've got here and here. Okay.
Thank you, Rubail Fatah from ISED. I think since we are also looking at certain groups, that there should be some, for example, youth groups, senior groups, perhaps newcomer groups, those that are affected by the most, perhaps negatively, or that are the most vulnerable of the usage of IoT, rural community groups, so kind of a test group of these kind of different subgroups within it.
So I think a critical point in what you're making is that it's not enough to say the people who are affected. You've actually got subgroups within that, and you need to identify particularly outliers within that, because otherwise, very civil society groups, for instance, can represent the mainstream thing, and you want to make sure that the people at the margins of all of those things are included as well. Is that fair?
Precisely, yeah.
Okay.
Well, we certainly need people to do research and to analyze this stuff, so there's no question about that. The stakeholders, so in my case, I'd be very interested in seeing cities involved. I'd be very interested in seeing procurement officers involved, because they would be key users of some of the output of some of these, at least on the aggregation side of it, but also things like Citizen Lab and others who can help us unpack some of the larger implications of aggregate aspects of these tools, from surveillance to policing, mission creep, and all of those other kinds of things that tend to go on the wayside of these discussions.
Okay. Oh, one more? Two more.
And civic, of course.
That's not what people with communications experience.
Okay.
Sorry, just because.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, no, next to you.
Justin Anstett, TBS. Something that might be interesting is trying to track this through some sort of metrics or polling. There was interesting polling done recently on how people think of AI, whether they want government services delivered through artificial intelligence and how comfortable they would be with that, and it's shockingly low, even though people talk regularly to chatbots or something like that and don't really think about it. So some way to kind of measure how public is thinking around these things.
Okay. Okay, so before we move on to the final one, which has bigger gaps in it, I just want to point out the reason we have been laying this out is because all of you who are going to be signing up for this, you're going to need to be identifying these gaps within your working groups, because you're going to have to beat the bushes. I don't know all of these people. I'm a geek. They keep me far away from humans. All right, our final thing was this network resilience, and I think that it's pretty clear that we need network operators involved in that, and it seems pretty obvious that we need sort of manufacturing type people who are making these devices or selling them or whatever, because remember, we're going to protect the devices from the network too. Who else needs to be there? The coders. We said that we're going to get code, so we need coders involved. That it? This is what's interesting in a room of policy people If you ask, well, here's a technical topic, who do you need? Oh, it's the techies. It's fun, because that's actually the experience that we have the other direction too, right? If you walk into a room full of propeller heads, and you say, well, what? Oh, it's all public policy people. They make any of the distinctions. So I think that this is an area where I would urge people to reflect a little bit harder on who all needs to be there. So, okay, really good. So we need the standards development organizations. We need to make sure that perspective is included there, because right, it's supposed to be generating requirements for SDOs. If the SDOs say that ain't a standard, it's not going to be a very useful requirement. Okay, that is our stuff, and what we've got now is the clipboard passing about. So, how you laid this out?
Name, affiliation, email.
So we've got names and affiliations and emails on here. And at the top of the page, there's labeling, network resilience, and education and awareness. So show you, see at the top of the page it says which topic it is. Here it is. And then your name, your affiliation, and your email. Very easy. We're going to pass this around, and people can sign up. You've all got pens. Do we want to separate them? So, there's an idea. We can separate them into 3. Right, then we can circulate them independently. I'll start one here. Oh,
Parallel process.
Right. This is parallel processing in action. And if you get one that you don't want, don't sign on to that one, because we're going to sign you up for a working group. This means that you will be getting email. I'm already on all the lists, I'm afraid. Now, while we are circulating that, while people are signing up for it, I want to ask whether there are other kinds of things that we ought to be doing in order to communicate with one another. Because one of the things I have noticed is that the mailing list traffic is pretty much non-existent. And I come from a world where if you stand up a mailing list, immediately you get like 400 messages, and it's about like what the headers should be. And so that's not maybe that's not this environment. But the problem that we're having is that we need to do the work. And this kind of writing stuff down is not going to happen ideally in a meeting, right? Because it's hard to write in a meeting. It's easy to write among colleagues on a list. So I guess I'm asking, do people want to do they want other kinds of platforms? There's been a proposal to take some of this discussion to LinkedIn. That's one proposal that people have had. I had maybe a different reaction to that proposal, but I'm very happy to hear what people have to think about this.
Yeah, just to reiterate what I said earlier, consider using Slack for this and have different channels for the different working groups and such.
So Slack is a proposal. Slack, for those of you who are not familiar with Slack, is an online collaboration tool. It's very popular among people who like to talk online. It has privacy properties that some people don't like, but other people are comfortable with. So people would have to make up their minds about whether they're willing to join that. These don't have to be mutually exclusive options, right? We don't have to have one tool, but that's a proposal. I don't know if people like Slack. I don't know if people have had a lot of experience with it. Some people don't know it. We can think about that, so that's a proposal. So you'd like to have regular conference calls. You want to have check-ins regularly. Katie's got a thing?
Yeah, to that end, we're starting to hold monthly regular webinars, and we encourage you to join those, and we'll send out more information about the one each of the lists.
so that remote people can hear that, there are going to be more regular webinars. ISOC is planning to hold them more regularly, so there'll be more updates coming on the mailing list about that.
Do you guys have any infrastructure where we can co-share documents, drop stuff, blah, 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 that kind of thing? Or are we going to use all our own kind of Dropboxes, et cetera?
So the shared infrastructure for that kind of thing. This is something that ISOC would be able to say more clearly than I would.
I was going to say, there should be, like, not yet, maybe, but reporting out mechanisms for the groups that are periodic so that if the group wants to do others,
Okay.
set up.
Regarding the question about is there, can ISOC provide some services to share documents? Yeah, we have a number of services we use from Box on down to, we're big users of Slack, and you can have documents posted to Slack, and so it is an interesting tool, but it doesn't have to be the tool we use.
So the Mark said that ISOC has multiple services of this. There's Box, there's Slack, there is a Slack service there. You can post documents in Slack. So there's maybe more than one that we can do. And this sounds to me like, I think the point that you're making, though, is that this sounds like a set of services that are probably needed to get this working well. And then there was another thing while that was going on, which was maybe what we need are some formal reporting mechanisms from the various working groups. So that seems like something that the working groups need to figure out how they're going to deliver that, and we can try to make sure that it's structured appropriately for that.
I also just wanted to relay a comment from the web. Someone commented and said that they want to make sure that everyone in the room is aware of the US's NTIA working group on IoT security. They have a catalog of existing IoT security standards and a technical capabilities and patching expectations working group. So it might be useful to take a look at that and see if there are ways that we can work together, things that we overlap on.
Yes, I strongly agree. The NTIA has done a lot of work on this. The U.S. National Telecommunications and Information Administration has a working group about this. There's another set of people working on this at the U.S. National Institutes for Standards and Technology. So there's a lot of resources out there just in the United States, but we've got also international ones and so on. Do we still have these things circulating? I'm alert to the time.
Yeah.
So they haven't made it to the back. That's good to know. They're still moving. I told you I was going to bar the doors, so this is what I'm doing.
Will there be some kind of coordinative function at ISOC that's going to kind of sort us out a little bit, nudge us along, keep us happy, make sure we work? Where'd he go?
I believe he's standing. I believe he's standing right next to you.
I'll be your guy, so.
So Tom is the Sherpa for this. That's right. Network resiliency.
Where's decision support? Where's that one? It's here. Oh, it's over there. Great. Great.
Yeah? All right.
Wait, no.
No, you?
Do you have more housekeeping that you want to? I guess what I'm really asking is, can I sit down?
Yes.
All right.
Educational awareness and all.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. This was great discussion today, and I think we've got a real solid plan forward right now. I hope you'll be able to join us at a reception that starts very shortly at side door, which is out to the left, I'm told, and just a little ways down. Yeah, thank you very much. It's an inspiring day, I think, and I look forward to the discussions on whatever tool we decide to use for each of the working groups. Tom is the guy who will be providing all of the support to the groups and making sure that everything gets done and everything happens. So, yeah, and that's about it. Thank you very much.